Let's dive into one of history's most epic and tragic rivalries. It's a story of jealousy so powerful it almost tore a kingdom apart. And you know, the craziest part? It didn't start with a declaration of war. It started with a song.
And that question right there is the heart of this entire story. I mean, think about it. You've got King Saul, the guy on the throne, the established power. And then you have David, this young upstart hero who just saved everybody. So what happens when that celebration and admiration starts to curdle into a deadly, paranoid obsession? And this is the little spark that starts the wildfire. After David's incredible victory over Goliath, the women of Israel are just ecstatic. They're pouring into the streets, singing and dancing. But this song, which is supposed to be celebrating a hero, it lands like a slap in the face to King Saul. He doesn't hear praise. He hears a leaderboard. He hears them saying David is 10 times better than him. And in that moment, all he can think is, what else can he get but the kingdom? Right there, that's the moment Saul's suspicion turns into full-blown, toxic jealousy. You can just see this massive gap opening up between these two men. On one side, you have Saul. He's a king in decline, feeling like he's lost God's favor, and he is just paralyzed by fear and paranoia. But David, he's on this rocket ship to the top. He's popular, he's successful, and he has this unshakable faith that God is on his side. So this isn't just a simple rivalry. It's a collision course between two totally different destinies.
Okay, so this is where the story takes a really fascinating twist. The one person who should have been David's biggest rival, the guy with the most to lose, Saul's own son and the heir to the throne, is Jonathan. But instead of jumping on his father's paranoia bandwagon, he does the exact opposite. Jonathan doesn't just become David's friend. He makes a formal, binding promise, a covenant with him. And then he does something absolutely mind-blowing. He takes off his own princely robe and gives it to David. Now, this is so much more than a nice gesture. In that world, it was a massive political statement. He was basically handing over his own claim to the throne. Jonathan becomes what scholars call a literary foil. His incredible, selfless loyalty just makes his father's insane paranoia look even worse. Well, it was only a matter of time before Saul's paranoia just boiled over. One day, David is just doing his job, playing the lyre to try and soothe the king. The text says an evil spirit from God, which is basically this tormenting, distressing mood, just completely overwhelms Saul. And in a flash of pure rage, he grabs his spear and hurls it at David, trying to pin him to the wall. This is it, the first time that jealousy turns flat-out murderous. David dodges the spear, and the reason the story gives is simple. It's direct, and you're going to hear it over and over like a drumbeat. The Lord was with David. You really got to hang on to that phrase because it's the key to this whole thing. It's the ultimate justification for everything that happens from here on out. It frames David not as some rebel, but as the guy who is divinely protected. So when brute force doesn't work, Saul gets crafty. He gets manipulative. He offers his other daughter, Michal, to David in marriage. It seems like a huge honor, right? Bringing him into the royal family. But here's the catch. The bride price isn't gold or livestock. No, it's 100 Philistine foreskins. A gruesome and Saul thinks totally impossible task. The plan is just pure evil. Let the Philistines do his dirty work for him. It's basically a death sentence, disguised as a wedding proposal. But the plan backfires in the most spectacular way you can imagine. David doesn't just survive this suicide mission. He comes back with double the asking price, 200 Philistine foreskins. And you've got to understand, for Saul, this isn't good news. It is terrifying. It's just more undeniable proof that God is with David, and it sends Saul's fear into absolute overdrive.
Right, so after this, any pretense of being friendly is just gone. The hunt is on, and David is now a fugitive, running for his life. This next chapter is just a blur of one desperate, nail-biting escape after another. And things just get crazy. Saul throws a spear at him again. His own wife, Michal, has to help him escape through a window in the middle of the night, and she fools Saul's men by putting an idol in his bed. David flees to the prophet Samuel, but Saul is just obsessed. He sends soldiers to get him, but they get there and are suddenly overcome by the Spirit of God and start prophesying. So he sends another group of soldiers. Same thing happens. So finally, Saul goes himself, and believe it or not, the exact same thing happens to him. He is supernaturally blocked at every single turn. It's wild. So at this point, you could imagine David is just at the end of his rope. He's hiding out, and he has to know, is this just a temporary fit of rage from the king, or is Saul really going to hunt him down forever? He risks everything for one last, top secret meeting with the only person in that whole kingdom he knows he can trust, Jonathan. So they come up with this really clever kind of spy movie signal. The plan is Jonathan will go out to a field to practice archery, and David will be hiding nearby. Jonathan will then shout instructions to his servant, but the words are really a coded message for David. If he says the arrows are close by, it means it's safe to come back. But if he shouts that the arrows are beyond you, that's the signal. It means run. Run for your life and don't ever come back. And the test? Well, it reveals the absolute worst. At a royal feast, when Jonathan tries to make an excuse for David being absent, Saul just explodes. I mean, a complete meltdown. He screams at his own son, tells him that as long as David is alive, Jonathan will never be king. And then, in this moment of just pure, uncontrolled fury, he does the unthinkable. He hurls his spear at his own son.
So, Jonathan has his answer. It's terrible, but it's undeniable. He goes to the field, he gives David the signal to flee, and the two friends have one last meeting. And the story gives us this just gut-wrenching detail of their goodbye. It says they wept together, but David, who's now lost everything and is heading into exile, he wept the most. Just a tragic end to an incredible friendship, all because of a king's paranoia. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. This incredible story, I mean, it's got loyalty, jealousy, action, miraculous escapes. It's amazing. But it's so much more than just an ancient adventure story. To really get what's going on, we have to ask why. Why was this story told in this exact way? And this is where it gets really interesting. Biblical scholars actually have a name for this whole part of the story. They call it the apology for David. Now, apology here doesn't mean he's saying sorry for something. Think of it more like a legal defense, like a lawyer's argument in a courtroom. The entire narrative is brilliantly constructed to prove one single crucial political point. David didn't steal the throne. He was the innocent, divinely chosen successor. And the story lays out the evidence like a lawyer building a case. Point one, that constant refrain, the Lord was with David. That's your divine endorsement right there. Point two, Saul is always shown as unstable, paranoid, and violent. But maybe the most powerful piece of evidence? Point three, even Saul's own children, his heir Jonathan and his daughter Michal, they risk everything to side with David over their own father and king. The story makes an airtight case that David was the victim here, not the guy trying to steal the crown. And that leaves us with this really powerful question, and it's all wrapped up in the character of Jonathan. Here's a guy who stood to lose a kingdom, his inheritance, his father's love, maybe even his life. And he chose loyalty to his friend and what he believed was a higher calling. His story really makes you ask, what is the true cost of loyalty? Especially when you're loyal to something, a person, a principle, a belief, that's bigger and more important than any earthly power.